So Wayne, what are we doing tonight?
Agreement for sale.
It wasn't like that when we rehearsed it. I don't know. All right.
So Barry told me beforehand, he's like, Wayne, I want you to be the one that's like exciting because I'm going to put these people to sleep in the first 5 minutes.
I'm doing something.
So I'm doing my best.
All right, Jen. Up arrow, down arrow. All right, so agreements for sale are a creative real estate strategy. I mean, traditionally, what do? We do long-term buy and hold. And thank you. We do long-term buy and hold. Wayne has a bunch of long-term buy and hold properties in his portfolio. I have in mine. Most of my portfolio is. But there are other ways to buy and sell property, and we call it creative real estate. And tonight we're talking about that particular strategy called agreements for sale. Agreements for sale. All right, we'll try it again. There's me, there's Wayne. Don't we look good? Yeah, we do. All right. For sale, I'm going the wrong way. Going this way, going that way. Okay, so here's a key item. If you don't know what the heck you're looking at or looking for, then how are you going to find it? So a key part of this whole thing is, we love to say, if you understand the strategy, you will recognize the opportunity. You got to understand what any strategy is, and an agreement for sale is no different. You got to know what that is, and then when an opportunity pops up, geez, got to start spitting at it. Then you'll know, say, hey, this maybe is an opportunity for an agreement for sale. So we're going to talk about, explain what an agreement for sale is, kind of how it works, and what about, is it working in today's market? What's going on with that? So let's just have an overview.
Do you mind if I ask a show of hands really quickly? How many people here have actually know what an agreement for sale is? Okay, so we'll just skip to the expert level.
Sure. Let's forget about
Everybody
all
knows
the
what it is.
explanations. I mean, all the basics. We won't go over any of the basics. No, we're gonna talk about it a little bit. All right. So a bit of history is probably helpful to explain where the agreement for sale came from. So back in the day, then when we had a horrible market cycle called the Great Depression, banks and cities ended up owning like half the properties in the country because people couldn't pay their taxes, they couldn't pay their mortgage, and properties got taken back. And so when you went to the bank to say, I want to buy a house, they go, sure, great. You got 50% put down. You got 50%, 5-0. So not many people are getting mortgages at banks because not many people have 50% to put down. So if sellers wanted to sell, they had to be the bank. And sometimes sellers would sell with what's called the VTB, or the vendor take-back mortgage, where the title transfers into the buyer's name. And sometimes they'd sell by way of agreement for sale, where title stays in the seller's name, but the buyer has an interest in the property. So that was a way that folks could buy and sell houses when they couldn't get any help from banks. So that went on for a long time, but then CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing, was created. The banking rules were relaxed. All of a sudden, you didn't have to put down 50%. So that strategy kind of went by the wayside. People forgot about it, but we resurrected it.
When was the CMHC created?
1953.
So right after the war.
Right after the war, yeah.
Everybody's getting a home.
All those soldiers coming back needed places to live and they couldn't buy, so something had to happen. All right. All right, so let's see, 1947, earlier than that. So yeah, right after the war.
Sorry, I'm ruining
coincidentally the year I was born. My goodness, I don't even want to talk about that. All right, so now lenders can lend up to 80%, 95% if a loan is insured. That's a big improvement. But we've come full circle to the point where the agreement for sale strategy has come back. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about, why is it different than a sale with a vendor take back mortgage? And the main reason is that in an agreement for sale, when you buy a property by way of agreement for sale, title stays in your seller's name. Now, don't let that make you nervous, because you do have an interest in the property that you can protect. You do have what's called a beneficial interest. If the seller has a mortgage, they continue to make their mortgage payments. It's all worked into the numbers. If the seller is your bank, you didn't go off to see TD Bank or Canadian Western Bank or anybody else. The seller is your bank when you buy by way of agreement for sale. So, but overall, it's a seller financing strategy, is what it is. An AFS is seller financing. Is that how you explain it, Wayne? Yeah.
That's that simple.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah, it really is. Okay. All right, let's do some examples just to kind of show you how it works. We're going to do 3 scenarios here, and in each scenario, we're going to have a property where the seller wants $400,000 and the buyer has differing amounts of money. And actually, we can turn this around and talk about from the buyer's perspective too. So
Yeah.
we'll go for seller, and then maybe we'll add some buyer stuff in.
Yeah, for sure.
As an agreement for sale works if you're a buyer or if you're a seller, different reasons, but it does work. So in this particular case, the seller has a clear title property. In other words, he has no mortgaging against that property. He wants $400,000 and the buyer only has $25,000. Okay, who can do quick math? If you're buying a $400,000 property and you get a conventional mortgage with 20% down, what's your down payment? $80,000. $80,000. This buyer only has $25,000. He wants to buy. So here's how it looks. Seller's got his clear title property, no mortgage on it, and the seller is the bank for the $375,000 that the buyer doesn't have. Got to negotiate those terms. The seller's lending. Now, what can we have for terms? If the seller's lending 375, how do you figure out what the buyer's paying?
Well, I mean, the seller is obviously not getting their money today. And if you were to do a traditional purchase, you'd normally have, you get a mortgage and the mortgage funds be sent over to the seller, right? So the seller isn't getting his money. I'm sure the seller wants something in exchange for that, something that's worth them keeping that money tied up. So, I mean, you could just ask them, well, how much, what are you planning on doing with this $375,000? Are you planning on investing it? What kind of returns are you getting, having it sitting in your bank? So on average, I would normally say it would be similar or a little bit more than what the current average mortgage rate is. So today might be somewhere around 5.5%. Is that accurate? Has it gone up today?
I think it's in the area. I mean, to say that what the seller will ask the buyer to pay for interest is likely a little bit more than what the buyer would have to pay if he went to the bank. So if the bank's offering 4.5%, the seller might say 5%.
Yeah.
So you figure out what payments the buyer is going to make the seller based on a 5% mortgage, and those are the payments that the buyer makes to the seller. And here's how you write it up. You're working with your realtors, with your Mogul group realtors. There'll be a deposit paid of $25,000. There's $375,000 owing, and the purchase price is $400,000. Those numbers and the way you put them together are pretty straightforward. So another scenario. In this particular case, we still have a $400,000 property. Now the seller has $100,000 on. He has his own mortgage for $100,000. This time the buyer has $50,000. So what happens here? Okay, on one side of the brick wall, we've got the seller, his title, and his $100,000 mortgage. However, the seller is going to be the bank for $350,000. Again, buyer and seller talk to each other and go, okay, well, you're lending me the money. Buyer says, I'm happy to pay you 1%. Seller might say, I'd be very unhappy if you paid me 1%.
Is that what he'd say?
I think he'd say that. And so a negotiation happens for what the terms of the loan from the seller are. How long is it going to be? Is it going to be 2 or 3 years where the seller doesn't want to be the bank anymore? Going to be a long time, 10 years? Maybe the seller likes being a lender and getting money per month. Hard to tell. Anyway, you negotiate your terms, and it produces a payment that the buyer has to make on that $350,000. And so, Wayne, when the buyer makes that payment on the $350,000, what happens to it?
When the buyer makes the payment on that 350, well, they will send it over to the seller, and then the seller has their underlying payments as well that they need to make, right?
Seller will make his payment on his $100,000 mortgage and he'll put the rest of the money in his pocket. So that's how that one works. And the third scenario, well, this is how you write it up. It's kind of the same as the other one, isn't it? $50,000 down, balance owing of 350 and a purchase price of 400. Easy peasy to write these up in a purchase contract. Scenario number 3, we still have our $400,000 purchase price. This time the buyer has $100,000 to put down and he has a $200,000 mortgage. So it looks the same as the last one, doesn't it? The seller in his title, but a $200,000 mortgage, seller's the bank for $300,000. We negotiate again. We figure out what the payment's going to be on the $300,000. The buyer sends it over the wall to the seller. The seller takes enough to pay his $200,000 mortgage and he puts the rest of the money in his pocket. So that's kind of how an agreement for sale works. And, you know, it works on the buy side and the sell side. If we went back to our first example, $400,000 price, buyer has $25,000. So why is that interesting to a buyer? The buyer can purchase a property by way of agreement for sale on those terms, $400,000, $25,000 down, he's your bank for $375,000. Why does a buyer like that? And why is any of you folks who might be buyers, why would you like that? I don't have to go and get traditional financing and put 20% down, which is $80,000. That's a big reason.
Well, that's almost 3.5 times your ROI, if you think about it. Because if you put $80,000 down, you'd be getting the same return as if you put $25,000 down. So you just almost more than tripled your ROI. I think it's fantastic from a buyer perspective and not having to carry mortgages. Because I know all of you, if you're getting around that second, third, fourth mortgage, you're starting to feel it. You're starting to feel that, you know, the mortgage broker saying, I don't think your DCR is going to meet anymore because you bought all those properties and they don't cash flow. So this is a great solution. It's great. It's why I jumped on it early on. And I don't know if any of you guys know this. I took Barry McGuire's course back in 2016 for that exact reason. I ran out of joint venture capital. At the very least, I thought I did. And also I was kind of creeping up on that mortgage wall. The mortgage broker was telling me, getting kind of close, maybe 1 or 2 more. So, you know, that's why I looked at Barry's course and I said, I got to figure out a different way. I mean, it's done.
So those are the two biggies, aren't they?
Yeah.
Lower down payments and not having to qualify for mortgages really can widen up the number of properties that you can buy. Yeah. All right. So on that last one, we got our deposit of $100,000, $300,000 balance owing, purchase price of. The great thing about an agreement for sale is it can work in any market because it's often a situational strategy. If you've got a seller who has a problem that needs fixing, or if you have a seller who has a particular set of interests that will be served by an agreement for sale, it works great. When sellers have properties that they bought maybe for 5% down, when the market drops a little bit, all of a sudden their property is worth really only the value of their mortgage. Really the only value of their mortgage. And so that's a tough one for a seller who had, say, his $400,000 property and he got a 95% CMHC mortgage. I mean, that mortgage on the property, if it's a 5% CMHC mortgage, is likely about $395,000 or more. If the market drops a tiny bit off the $400,000 value, all of a sudden the property's only worth the mortgage. So what does the seller do if he wants to sell? Now, the Mogul guys are wonderful guys. They really are. They're a great group. They're a great group. But when that seller comes along and talks to a Mogul realtor and says, I want to list my property for sale, and they look at the numbers, there's going to be probably some long pauses. The Mogul guys are going, okay, how am I going to break this to them? Okay, I'll just come out and say it. Okay, you do understand that we work and we get paid commission. Your house is worth the value of the mortgage. you understand? You're going to have to write me a check here. So there's some opportunities there, but there are lots of opportunities in every market, but especially in a fluctuating market. And we're kind of in that now. It's fluctuating up, it's going down. We don't really know which way it's going. So there's going to be lots of agreement for sale opportunities as we move along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've been watching the market very closely for the last 6 months, trying to think about because we've all been watching the interest rates creep, and then they kind of just did this. But I've been watching it and I've been trying to figure out how can I capitalize on this? I'm a capitalist. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an investor. I want to make money, right? You all want to make money. And as this has been happening, I'm thinking, wow, this is an amazing time for an agreement for sales. Amazing. Like I haven't seen this kind of opportunity since 2016-ish. And that's when I took the course originally. So I'm glad that Devin and James brought that up. Is, you know, you need to be a sophisticated investor, right? You need to be creative. You got to think outside the box. And this is an amazing opportunity for you to really build up your portfolio, you know, while everybody else is getting scared or while everybody else is trying to sell, but they can't get the price they want.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We'll work that into. So let's talk about why, we just talked a little bit about why buyers might be interested in agreements for sale, but then we often talk about buyers. Well, let's talk about sellers. And why is an agreement for sale attractive to a seller? So it definitely widens up the number of buyers who would be attracted to your seller property. So all buyers can go off to a bank and if they can qualify and get a mortgage, great. But what if a buyer loves your property and they can't get a mortgage? So all those buyers who want to buy from you but can't get a mortgage are all of a sudden your customers. So that's one thing. And yeah, I mean, we've talked about it, Devin talked about it, we all know. The rates have gone up, and that means there are fewer buyers who can buy at previously well understood price points. People are sitting on the fence a little bit. They're not sure what's going on. But if as a seller who's going to offer financing, you're able to offer a buyer an interest rate that fits for their circumstances, guess what? If you say, listen, I'll sell to you and you can have a 5-year rate with me. And, you know, maybe you're not going to ask them for the 5% that is what they'd have to pay if they went to the bank. Maybe you want to sell and you go, you know what, I'll be the bank and I'll charge them 3.9. That would be very attractive to some buyers. What about this price for terms thing? What does that mean?
You mean in regards to the purchase price?
In regards to the purchase price. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you're offering a huge incentive, right? You have that nice low interest rate. And even though, you know, you're at 3.9%, which is significantly lower than the 5%, you should be getting something as a seller, shouldn't you? Right? Because otherwise, why wouldn't you just sell it to an investor and sell it in, you know, to a buyer who has a mortgage and get all your money out today? If you're going to have that money tied up, if you're going to offer some sort of an incentive like that, you should probably get something in exchange. And I think what Barry was speaking of was maybe a little bit extra on top of the purchase price.
That's right.
So
that's exactly it.
So if you're trying to sell for 400,000, it's worth 400,000, and you're going to give them a 5-year term. It's at a really good interest rate and they don't have to carry financing. What if you sold it to them for, say, 420,000?
Yeah.
Right. Now you're getting a better, you're getting the interest rate spread that Barry was talking about between that 1.9 and 3 point, whichever. Plus you're getting an extra $20,000 on top of the purchase price.
Now, what if you're a seller who, who's looking for your own monthly cash flow that perhaps you were an investor, perhaps you rented properties and that's where you got your cash flow. But what if you're pivoting and switching and you'd like to do something else? Let's say you've got a sweet mortgage that you got when rates were 1.9 and there's 4 years left on that. You can, when you talk to your widened market of buyers who are interested in you because you can be a bank, if you say to a buyer, yeah, you know what, I'll be your bank. You don't have to go qualify. Yes, I'm going to do some diligence on you because I want to know you're a good credit risk.
Of course, make sure you do your diligence. Yeah,
do that. Sure. And then you can say, I will sell to you. My rate is 4.9%. My rate is 4.9. You are paying 1.9. Your buyer is going to pay you 4.9. That generates decent cash flow. And we'll see in a case study we're going to.
Oh, I wanted to say how much cash flow it actually was.
Please say that.
3%, okay, on a $400,000 house. I'm going to keep it simple. That's $12,000 of interest a year divided by 12 months. $1,000 of cash flow every month, just on that example right there.
Yeah.
How many of you guys would like to have cash flow, a really good sale price, and not have to deal with tenants? Pretty sure you can all put your hand up. I mean, it sounds pretty great. That's the way that I looked at it when I first saw this. I'm like, oh God, why would I ever do tenants ever again? I'm just going to buy properties and then just sell them back to investors and make lots of money, the same rate of return, and not have to deal with tenants and toilets and you know, like James said, you know, the basement tenant yelling about the upstairs tenant, and the upstairs tenant yelling about the basement. You know, oh, this is amazing. This is like, it just blew my mind when I read about this.
And the other thing, as a seller, and if this is a fluctuating market comment, we don't know where the market's going. The market has been up, it's been down. It was wild earlier in the year. Now it's not as wild. CMHC says, I saw some stats saying that prices are going to rise nicely in Western Canada over the next 3 years. Is that going to happen? I don't know. You know, nobody knows. But if you're happy with a price now, let's just say we traded price for terms and your property is, you know, well, it's worth 400. Everybody agrees it's worth 400. You sell for 420. You've now locked in that price for yourself, and you really don't care if prices go down. I mean, you've locked in your number. Now, if prices go to 600,000, you may not like that very much, but in the unlikely circumstance, you're happy that you've got a price locked in.
I'm such a nerd. Like while you're talking, I'm doing math in my head, and I was still doing the math of that $400,000 deal. Like $12,000 a year times 5 years is $60,000. Plus we got a $20,000 premium on top of that. So that's $80,000. My math correct? And then the down payment that you put down on that $400,000, a $400,000 property is 80,000. So over 5 years is 100% rate of return. So 20% yearly rate of return, and not having to deal with tenants and not having any repairs and maintenance. Oh God, it's you know what I mean? How do you not get excited about that?
It just keeps
I'm just
going.
doing the math. Like, that's a really good example. Like, screw the other case studies. That's a really good one.
That is a good one. That is a good one. All right. So some of the reasons an agreement for sale is attractive to sellers. So the buyer is now taking over all of the ownership costs. You're on title. They owe you money, but now they've taken over everything. They're going to make you a payment, which takes care of your mortgage and whatever you've negotiated. They're going to pay the taxes. They're going to pay the insurance. They're going to pay all the maintenance on the property. They have to pay for everything. So now you don't have any of those costs. If you were a landlord, you now get rid of property management fees. You can also defer taxes. If you carry financing, you can defer taxes. What about that?
Yeah. Isn't it great?
Yeah. So if
really
you sell
great.
by way of agreement for sale, and if what you get, you've made a profit from when you buy, when you make a profit, you have to pay taxes. And this allows you to defer taxes for up to 5 years. Got to work with your accountant on how that really fits together. Plus, what about if you had a fixed mortgage that you needed to pay out? Well, you don't have to pay out your mortgage, and you avoid payout penalties. Payout penalties. Got to watch the P. Got to watch the P's. Can't spit into it, right?
That's a big one. That is a very big one. For both examples, as a buyer, as an investor, approaching sellers, that's a great feature to focus on when you're negotiating, because a lot of sellers, when they're trying to sell and they've locked into that 5-year fixed term, when it's a fixed term mortgage, the cancellation penalties are not, in most cases, are not 3 months interest. I know we all sign the mortgage documents really quickly when we're in Barry's office, and it says 3 months interest order, that interest rate differential calculation. And don't ask me to explain it, because every bank does it differently, and I've tried explaining it before and I butchered it. But basically, the bank wants what they were supposed to get for the remainder of the term. They have a very complicated formula that determines what the penalty is going to be, and it's either 3 months interest or the interest rate differential calculation, whichever is higher. So
Rivers
depending on how much you have left in your fixed term length, the length of your fixed term, sorry, that's going to determine how much money it's going to be. And I've seen some pretty high ones.
So they can be really high. Now that if you pay the bank back, they can lend it out at a higher rate. So sometimes I think those penalties
Yeah.
might get to be smaller. But nevertheless, when you have a fixed rate and you have to pay out, you often have penalties to pay. All right. So as we work through the agreement for sale strategy over time, and when we started, we thought the due on sale clause, it might be in a seller's mortgage, says if he sells, you got to pay out. That might be a problem. What if buyers don't pay? Now what? That's a problem for a seller. And if it's a situation where a seller has done the agreement for sale because they want income over 5 years, what if the buyer pays out at 2 years? But it turns out we don't experience these things. Not that they couldn't happen, but all of these issues that we thought might come up don't come up very much. And what we've ended up with is we've discovered that an agreement for sale is, because people aren't very familiar with it, it's more complicated administratively, is what it amounts to. And you need lenders who understand what an agreement for sale is. When it's time to pay out the seller and get rid of his loan that he's giving you and get your own new mortgage, sometimes lenders have difficulty with that. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, we have brokers like Keaton Kirkwood back there, who was at our AFS event on Saturday, and Keaton understands exactly what an agreement for sale is and would be able to coach anybody who had one who was looking to get a mortgage. So those things, and you need AFS lawyers. You need a lawyer on each side who understands, not somebody who says, I never seen one of those before. I wouldn't do it if I was you. Those guys.
Deal killer. You know what, I was reviewing these slides before we got started today, and I was talking with Barry, but a lot of this stuff right here, I know it sounds complicated, like how do you deal with the payments, who takes care of insurance, what happens at renewal time if there's supposed to be a renewal, what happens if they don't want to renew, all those types of things. And it's not actually that complicated if you actually just get the education. That's the truth. So, taking a course on this it will answer all those questions. Barry happens to have the only one, in my opinion, the best one. So just, you can always go out and take one of Barry's courses. He's got online home study kits that you can just go through the manual. It's got audio, it's got video, that kind of stuff. So like I said, it's complicated. It's only complicated if you don't get the right education. And if you're going to take on an advanced complicated strategy like this, I would strongly recommend taking a course, or lean on, as Barry said earlier, lean on, your expert realtors here at Mogul, because they understand it. I know for a fact, because I always see them taking pictures in Barry's office and they're doing training and stuff like that, right? So they understand it very well, and they're going to help you, guide you through that. Which, is that where we are right now?
Paper in the
Or is
deal.
this a good time just to
Jen, how are we
to
doing
take
for
that
time?
break?
Is it networking time? A few minutes? All right, so just before we skip over the notion of you need an AFS lawyer, I see we have Richard Bell is in the crowd. Richard, wave. Richard and I were at RMLO Law for years together, and Richard knows what an agreement for sale is. Yay! So if you need an AFS lawyer, there's another choice for you. Talk to Richard at the break. Then we'll say, okay, let's get Richard on the other side of this.
Is everybody following along? I've been watching very closely to everyone, see if anyone's falling asleep, see if anyone's just getting confused. It seems like everybody's just genuinely interested. But if you guys are confused, there will be an opportunity at the end for some questions later on, or you can pull Barry or myself aside during the little networking break, and we can answer some questions for you.
Yeah, we can do that at network or after the second part of our presentation. So on the paper side, peas, get me the peas.
No more peas.
Paper side of things, you and your realtor have to do things like, then we're talking about sellers here. If you're going to lend some money, you have to do some diligence on your buyer. Is he a good credit risk? You got to, as they say, underwrite the loan. And I think if you don't know how to do that, you should probably talk to your lender or your favorite mortgage broker to say, I'm planning to lend some money. Let's see whether this guy is a good credit risk, because you don't want to lend if they're not any good. And you need to write up a purchase contract and a financing schedule that really explains the deal and lets the lawyers put the paperwork together.
And that's a normal Alberta real estate purchase contract, right?
Absolutely. It's just the same one that the Mogul guys use and that you've all used. There's a one-page financing schedule that goes along with it that explains the financial details. That's really the more important document for you and your your realtor to figure out, and we can help with it. If some of it's obscure, we can help you figure that out. There's the financing schedule. On the other side of things, your lawyer writes up the agreement for sale document, which looks for all the world like a mortgage. It's a loan document. It's 10 or 12 pages long. It's full of complicated things, but you don't have to worry about that. We usually get a transfer of land signed when AFS deals get put together somewhere along the line. If you're a seller, you're going to have to give it, so you may as well sign it now. If you're a buyer, you want to know it's available just in case the seller isn't around.
So to repeat, the paperwork, the only paperwork you guys are responsible for between whether it be you, the buyer, and them, the seller, or you, the seller, and them, the buyer, it's just a normal Alberta real estate purchase contract and a one-page seller financing schedule, which just goes over the basics of the term, the interest rate, the terms, any additional terms like renewal, as we mentioned earlier, right? That's all you're getting them to sign right now. And then that paperwork gets sent off to your lawyers. And then Barry or Richard write up the huge 36-page mortgage agreement for sale contract and all that stuff. You don't have to understand that stuff. They take the information that is on your seller financing schedule and they plop it into the agreement for sale contract. So don't worry about becoming an expert on a 30 some odd page contract.
No, you just need to understand the strategy, find someone who it fits for, and then work with your realtor to get it written up. All right, so once you've got one done, we don't want to go into this in too much detail, but as a seller, you are the bank and you want to be an organized bank. You want to know what's going on. You want to make sure you know where the payments are coming from. You're communicating well with your buyer. You want to make sure insurance continues to be in place and it's appropriate for if this was a house you lived in, or if it's a rental, you want to talk to your insurance agent and say, you know what, I've sold my place by way of agreement for sale. Let's make sure that the insurance is still properly set up for that new circumstance.
No,
So,
the buyer is normally responsible for the insurance, right? In most cases?
responsible for the insurance cost.
Yes.
They pay for the cost.
Okay.
But insurance generally remains in the seller's name, but the buyer has to pay the premium.
Right.
All right. And at this point, we're at that break that James was talking about where we're going to go and create networks.